pistol is going to be much more advantageous than a rifle.
That if you're going to step into the realm of competition, the most basic thing you should be able to do is to play with some honesty and play with some honor and respect for yourself.
But half of the time, these guys aren't hitting anyone, and then when they do hit someone, they're not giving them the chance to even walk out.
Right.
They're saying get out as the person's barely raising their hand.
Welcome back to KBO Insight, and today we see the return of the previous finalists in Young and Rusta. One matchup that I'm particularly interested in seeing is the return of Rusta against Christian, a new contestant. Can Rusta maintain his focus after winning the 10K last season?
And the other matchup features the runner-up, Daniel Young versus Majin. That one seems very interesting as well. Will Daniel overcome this opponent and continue to move on and hopefully for him find himself in the finals again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It could be really interesting to see a rematch between Young and Rusta. We'll see how it plays out. And in our next fight, we'll see Rusta, the returning champion, versus Christian. One thing that I really take to heart is the ability for a player to take competition seriously. And for me, with Christian being a new contestant, maybe it's just inexperience. There's been several instances throughout this series where there's been some questionable no calls. And I think it's very important for any player, not trying to single anybody out, just using this as an example, that if you're going to step into the realm of competition, the most basic thing you should be able to do is to play with some honesty and play with some honor and respect for yourself, as well as the teams or possibly the sponsors that you're representing. It's a small world, especially in the competitive scene of airsoft. And I think it's just point blank. If you want to be taken seriously as a competitor, you got to play by the rules. You got to play with honor.
And I think a way that people can get used to calling their hits is it all starts with just regular public play. Being aware of what gear you're wearing, what type of clothing you're wearing. I always recommend to newer players dress down. Newer players are a little bit scared to get hit. You don't need to wear paintball pads and giant sweatshirts and all that. Go in a t-shirt, go in thinner jeans. Learn to call your hits from an early stage. That way when you get to tournaments, competitive gameplay, it's just second nature. You're not questioning in your head, was that a no call? Did I accidentally get hit? Just something to keep in mind for newer players or just players out there. When you play publics, call anything and everything. So by the time you do get to competition, there's no questions.
So, one of my biggest takeaways, especially in terms of competitive airsoft, is that anybody that puts themselves out there like that should play with honor, should play by the rules. No calls kind of plagued Christian's performance throughout this series. Rather than put a focus on him, not calling his hits, is it a function of the ref not doing their job, or is it the player's job to play with honor? What's your take on that?
I guess my personal perspective on it is it's always going to rely on the player first. The player should be aware of what gear he's wearing, what clothing he's wearing, what BBs sound like hitting off of different, items that he's wearing or she's wearing. And it's just the job of the player to be aware of that and to learn how to call things
At the same time, it's also the job of the ref to make sure to keep these players in check. So I think there's a little bit of awareness that the players need to have. And of course, the sport's always evolving. It's always progressing. We used to have nothing like this. There were no referees. Everybody would have to rely on the honor system. Fortunately, we have events like this where there are staff refs, and we're moving towards a direction where officiating an event like this is becoming easier. So yeah, that's something that, maybe the community can think about. Is it up to the player or is it up to the ref? You guys be the judge. So with Rusta, I want to talk about his mindset and his approach in this game. It's a little bit different from what we're used to seeing from him. A lot of times what we expect to see from Rusta is athleticism, fast-paced, but there's always like this part of him where he's a thinking guy. Like, you don't necessarily think that when you look at him. Aside from Rusta being very athletic, there's a very cerebral side to his game too. There's a few examples in this match that I want to bring to everybody's attention. And that's the use of cover, but not by using a barrier. It was by using color, light. He was wearing all black. There was this one situation where he used the wall as his cover. He wasn't really hiding behind anything. He was kind of just blending in, almost like a chameleon, to his background, not making any noise, not moving, almost like he was playing a passive game, but still on the hunt. What did you gather from that?
I think that's, kind of thinking out of the box that shows his experience. It's not something that would stand out right away, or not even something that, the more casual player would even think to do. Why would you put yourself out in the open like that? You would think that you would just get shot easily. But he's placing his body in the correct position, basically creating that camouflage.
Right. I mean, it is a risk. He is kind of like, it's almost like he's trying something that he hasn't done before. He's trying something that people don't normally do. And I think it's a product of him almost underestimating his opponent, almost like, okay, well, in this round, I'm going to play around a little bit and see what I could do. And it worked for him. Most people would probably argue that it's unorthodox. It's a little bit risky, and it's not something you should do it's not a textbook move. But I think that's why it stood out to me. It's something different, and I like to see stuff like that. What are the characteristics of this field that force a player to kind of think outside of the box?
I mean, just the shadows alone, Patrick did a good job of blending in, using the dark colored, clothing that he was wearing. That being said, it's probably not something that I would personally recommend or even do myself. Putting yourself at risk, throwing yourself out there and open, all for, that chance. He doesn't know that Christian's maybe, newer to this type of tournament, this type of gameplay. It's just not something that I could see myself doing. But, that's where that thinking outside of the box and, those different perspectives come into play. People have different styles. It's not my personal style, but it obviously worked for Rooster in this match.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a style thing, and I really believe that styles make fights. And I think Rooster did a really good job here of giving a look that Christian maybe wasn't expecting. So with this match, it's not so much anything I really have to say about it. It's more of a question. We saw a lot of pistol versus rifle work here. Do you think that one of these weapons or one of these platforms has an advantage over the other in a 1v1 situation?
I think going back to Xander's previous match where he had a pistol and he was using it against Roman, who was using a rifle, same answer. It's I'm always going to think that a pistol in a 1 versus 1, especially indoor setting where the distances aren't that far, a pistol is going to be much more advantageous than a rifle. A pistol is going to be easier to maneuver, easier handle. You can hold, the gun in one hand. The magazines are easy to carry. The list goes on and on as far as.
But what about like firepower? What about volume? Like if a rifle player such as myself, whether I don't care what they're using, pistol. In some ways, though, even though we can both agree that a pistol is more advantageous in close quarters, especially at this field with this format, I think a player with the right amount of speed, the right amount of foresight in using a rifle, the fact that you have more firepower, more suppressive power, I don't necessarily think that a pistol is always at an advantage. I think the right play, any weapon system in the right hands of the right player, they can make that work in their favor.
Let's take a look at the games between Daniel Young, the runner-up from last season, versus Majin. One thing that I can't stand at all is going to be 2 words, and it's going to be when players yell, "Get out."
Get out, come on. Back hit, come on. Okay. Get out, come on. He's a hit. Nope.
I mean, I don't know what's up with this new trend. Maybe it's us old timers that aren't used to it. Maybe it's just me from my mainly airsoft background versus paintball. I don't know what it is, but this trend that players yelling out, "Get out," yelling out, "I called you," just being verbal across the field. It's just, I don't.
Yeah, it's not really something that was in our sport, say 10 years ago. I, for one, say it here and there. I think there's a time and place for it, Obviously, in competition, even in public play, to be honest, it comes from paintball. The culture of paintball, having started in the woods, relying on referees to pull players. This is pre-competition. Like you would be like, ref, I shot him on his pack, I shot him on his mask, and the referee would actually go run out there and do a paint check.
Yeah.
But airsoft's different. It's almost like you're calling for something that's in the past tense already. But again, I do think there's a time and place for it, in that if you're in competition, sometimes you really gotta fight for yourself sometimes. If I know I hit somebody in a very specific place, whether it's on the foot, on a specific part of the body, on their finger, on their hand, on their mask, on their headband, I won't necessarily yell to the referee because that's against the rules. I'm gonna yell at the player because he knows he got hit. There's a little bit of a mind game. If I know exactly where I shot you, I'm gonna tell you I shot you there. Most people are gonna feel like they got caught red-handed, especially if we can call exactly where you hit. So I don't necessarily agree that it doesn't belong at all. I think that sometimes a competitor has to fight for himself and really try to get the points,
And my counter to that is, half of the time these guys aren't even hitting him. They're missing the shots. They're yelling, get out. I would go back to the fundamentals. Make sure you're hitting someone before you're yelling, get out. Make sure that, there's... I understand your reasoning for it. I understand. But half of the time, these guys aren't hitting anyone. And then when they do hit someone, they're not giving them the chance to even walk out. Right. They're saying, get out, as the person's barely raising their hand.
And they say it in such a matter-of-fact way, when it's like, sometimes you need to humble yourself. Like, you didn't hit them. And that I can agree on. Like, if you are honest with yourself, there's no reason why you should be yelling that out. For me, I think it's just kind of a toxic thing.
A little cringy.
It's a little cringy. It's kind of a trend, like it's something that people think they have to say. But I think the sport can do without it, There's a lot of things we could bring in from other sports, but that's not happening. And I don't think this is something that we really need to borrow from somebody else.
Yeah, it's definitely unnecessary. And I hope it gets cleaned up a little bit.
So while I think that both of us can agree that it's cringy at times, my personal take is that until the leagues start, enforcing the rules a little bit harder, until the referees start doing a better job, until the organizations even write rules where verbal communication like this is actually penalized, it's just going to be something that's part of the sport, unless something drastic is done.
And my final take on it is, no need to say anything, just shoot more.
All right, let's get straight into the next match between Valiant and Cloud. Interesting story is that Valiant used to play for Biohazard, and Cloud is now part of that team. Since leading the team, Eddie's been playing a lot, putting a lot of mileage down at Tac City, playing a lot of Speaky B, different Jungle Ball as well.
He's played at Project
different, he's just playing a more of a competitive player. Grew his brand a lot, so I think his confidence level is very high right now. So it does seem like that time away from the team, where he had a chance to grow on his own, really paid off. While it might seem like a very simple play, there was one instance where Eddie was in the back corner, right, and we had Cloud at the 50, and they were fighting heads up. So typically, like, my personal take is I never like to fight straight up. I never like to give my opponent a left side to hit me from, a right side to hit me from, and in some cases, a higher area to hit me from. I like to shift over, create angles, and that's exactly what Valiant did here. He kind of lulled Cloud into thinking it was a straight up snap battle. He shifted over to the left, waited for Cloud to pop out from his right side, lined him up and took the shot and got the kill.
And maybe not necessarily shifting angles so much, but just the fact of appearing in one spot and appearing in another. That disappearing act definitely confuses players, and it's something that I like to do, and something that I try and teach my prospects or different people who I'm kind of mentoring. A very, very simple way to disorient your opponent, and changing levels, changing directions. It just changes from a single or one-dimensional player to this player that's more well-rounded, being able to do that.
Thanks again for joining us for KW Insight. In the next series, we're going to get into elimination rounds. We're going to getting to the elimination rounds where things start to get really serious. Sorry, I was like, why did I say that? Sorry. Oh shit, I hit the